The ICPC, Nigeria's Anti-Corruption Commission, has had a former governor and federal minister in its sights for months now. He's been invited, questioned, and investigated. But here's what nobody is asking out loud. Why hasn't he been charged? Because in Nigeria, the space between under investigation and in the dock is where the real politics lives. And the ADC just blew that space wide open. So the question is this a genuine legal process, or is Nasir Ahmad El-Rufai being used as a bargaining chip in a much bigger political game? Stay with me. Before we go deeper, if you're just finding Naija Newsfeed, welcome. This channel exists to break down what's really happening in Nigerian politics without the noise, without the spin. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because this one gets interesting. Here's what actually happened. The African Democratic Congress, the ADC, formally wrote to the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, the ICPC, with a direct demand. Either charge Nasir El-Rufai in court or release him from this open-ended investigation and let him get on with his life. That's a bold move from a political party. And it raises the question, why is a party making this kind of demand? We'll get to that. El-Rufai, for those who need the background, he served 2 terms as governor of Kaduna State from 2015 to 2023. Before that, he was Federal Capital Territory Minister under Obasanjo. He's one of the most polarizing figures in recent Nigerian political history. Brilliant and brutal depending on who you ask, a man who never lacked enemies. The ICPC's investigation revolves around allegations tied to his time as governor. The details include alleged financial misconduct, misuse of state funds, and other irregularities in Kaduna. These are serious allegations, but here's the thing. Serious allegations without a charge date have a habit of doing political work without ever going to court. And that's exactly what the ADC is pointing at. The timing of this investigation, coming after El-Rufai's departure from the APC and his growing friction with the Tinubu administration, is not something you can ignore. Let's talk about the institutions involved, because understanding the rules of the game matters here. The ICPC, the Independent Corrupt Practices Commission, was established in 2000. Its mandate is to receive and investigate reports of corruption, prosecute offenders, and recommend reform. On paper, it is independent, but in practice, its leadership is appointed by the president with Senate confirmation, which means it is never fully insulated from political pressure. Now, the law is clear. Once an investigation reaches a point where there's sufficient evidence, the ICPC is obligated to either prosecute or discontinue. There is no provision for indefinite holding patterns. That's important. What the ADC's letter is essentially saying is, you are using this investigation as a tool without following the process through. Either prosecute and let the courts decide, or admit you don't have a case and let the man go. Here's where it gets legally interesting. In Nigeria, you can be invited for questioning, have your assets scrutinized, have your name publicly associated with an investigation, and never be charged. That's not due process. That's reputational damage by bureaucratic delay. The ADC's argument at its core is El-Rufai's rights are being violated through prolonged pre-charge legal limbo. Now, is that argument entirely?
This is the part that matters. Forget the legal language for a moment. Follow the power. El-Rufai left the APC in 2024 and joined the Social Democratic Party. That was a significant move. He didn't leave quietly. He left with noise, with criticism of the Tinubu administration, and with the kind of political capital that a former 2-term governor still carries in northern Nigeria. The ADC's intervention is interesting because El-Rufai isn't even their member. So why are they doing this? 2 possibilities. 1. This is a principled stand about due process, using a high-profile case to establish a precedent. 2. The ADC is positioning itself as the party willing to take on the Tinubu administration on behalf of aggrieved political figures, which is a recruitment strategy dressed up as advocacy. Either way, the beneficiary in the short term is El-Rufai. Now, who benefits from the investigation continuing? The Tinubu administration gains from having one of its most articulate and dangerous critics under legal cloud. You don't have to convict someone to diminish them politically. You just have to keep the case alive long enough for the narrative to stick. Who stands to lose? If the ICPC drops the case or El-Rufai is acquitted, it will be read as a political retreat by Abuja. If the ICPC actually charges and loses in court, it further damages an institution that already has credibility problems. The silent players here are the northern political establishment, particularly those still navigating their relationship with Tinubu after the 2023 elections. El-Rufai is a signal to them. How he's treated tells them something about what happens when you step out of line. Let's zoom out. What does this mean for Nigeria as a whole? The first issue is the credibility of anti-corruption institutions. The EFCC, ICPC, DSS, these agencies are only useful if Nigerians believe they operate on evidence rather than political instruction. Every high-profile case that looks timed to a political fallout erodes that trust, and once that trust is gone, it's very hard to rebuild. Convictions become Pyrrhic victories because half the country assumes the process was rigged from the start. The second issue is federalism. El-Rufai was a state governor. If federal anti-corruption agencies can be routinely used to target former governors who become political opponents, it changes the calculation for every serving governor in Nigeria. The message becomes, stay loyal or become a target. That is a threat to the independence of state governance. Third, and this is bigger than El-Rufai specifically, is the precedent of prolonged pre-charge investigations as a political tool. If this becomes normalized, anyone who holds public office and subsequently becomes a critic of the federal government can be held in legal limbo indefinitely. That is not a democracy. That is a managed autocracy. For ordinary Nigerians, this matters because corruption investigations that don't result in convictions or are clearly politically motivated drain attention and resources from cases involving everyday corruption that affects their lives directly.
There's a limited but real international dimension here, and it's worth touching on. Western governments, particularly the UK and the US, have been watching Nigeria's governance trajectory carefully. The Tinubu administration came in with expectations of reform. International partners are watching how anti-corruption institutions are used. If the pattern emerges that these agencies are tools of political consolidation rather than genuine accountability, it affects Nigeria's relationships with the IMF, the World Bank, and bilateral partners who tie engagement to governance benchmarks. El-Rufai himself is not unknown internationally. He was a minister who dealt with major infrastructure and urban development projects. His name appears in various foreign business and policy circles. A prolonged legal cloud without charge affects his ability to operate in those spaces and, by extension, affects perceptions of Nigeria's rule of law internationally. For Nigerians in the diaspora, especially those engaged with advocacy or business investment back home, this case is a reminder of why institutional reform matters. Capital follows confidence, and confidence follows predictable rule of law. Now, if what I just laid out surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know your take before we get to the part that changes the whole picture. Let me steelman the other side because it's important. The strongest argument against the ADC's position is this: investigations take time. Corruption cases, especially those involving state government finances, require forensic accounting, cross-referencing of contracts, witness interviews, and document verification.
Rushing that process to satisfy a political party's timeline is how you lose cases in court. The ICPC might genuinely need more time, and demanding an arbitrary deadline could undermine justice. That's a fair point, and if that's what's happening, it deserves to be said. But here's where it falls apart. Nigeria has a history of high-profile investigations that conveniently stretch exactly as long as the political usefulness of the investigation requires. When the political wind shifts, so does the pace of the case. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidence. The second misconception is that this is purely about El-Rufai's guilt or innocence. This video hasn't argued he's innocent. Allegations of financial misconduct during his Kaduna tenure should absolutely be investigated. But investigation must lead somewhere. The legal principle of innocent until proven guilty doesn't evaporate because someone is politically inconvenient. The third narrative being pushed, mostly by APC loyalists, is that the ADC's intervention proves El-Rufai is still a powerful political actor pulling strings. That framing turns legal advocacy into a sinister conspiracy. It doesn't hold up. Political parties have every right to challenge the executive use of anti-corruption agencies.
Here's what I expect to happen next and what to watch for. Most likely scenario, the ICPC does nothing dramatic in the short term. The investigation continues to drift. El-Rufai remains in legal limbo through 2025 and into 2026, which covers the pre-election positioning period ahead of governorship cycles and early 2027 campaign maneuvering. That silence is itself a political act. Watch for this signal. If charges are suddenly filed shortly after El-Rufai publicly endorses or campaigns for an opposition candidate, you'll know the timing is not about evidence. If the investigation is quietly shelved around the time of any political realignment that brings El-Rufai back into the federal government's orbit, same conclusion, different direction. Second scenario, less likely but possible. The ICPC responds to the pressure by filing charges. This would be a high-stakes gamble. If the case is weak, they lose in court and look worse than if they'd done nothing. If the case is strong, it proceeds and El-Rufai faces a genuine legal process. Either way, a court date would at least resolve the ambiguity. Worst-case scenario. The investigation becomes a permanent feature of Nigerian political life, like a sword hanging over El-Rufai indefinitely, managed as political leverage indefinitely. That's bad for him, worse for Nigeria's institutions. Best-case scenario. This ADC intervention prompts genuine legal reform around the timelines and transparency requirements for ICPC investigations. That's the outcome that benefits ordinary Nigerians the most. At the top of this video, I asked a question. Is this a genuine legal process, or is El-Rufai being used as a bargaining chip in a much bigger political game? Here's my honest assessment. It's probably both. The allegations deserve investigation. El-Rufai is not above the law, but the pace, the timing, and the political context of this investigation make it very difficult to see it purely through a legal lens. What the ADC's demand does, whatever their motivation, is force a necessary choice.